The U.S. Army's 85th Division left Camp Custer, near Battle Creek, Michigan, on July 14, 1918, to join other U.S. Army divisions who were already fighting on the Western Front in France. On July 23, 1918, President Wilson directed that 5,000 U.S. Army soldiers be sent to Russia, whose Bolshevik government had earlier signed a peace treaty with the Germans that had brought an end to the fighting on the Eastern Front. U.S. Army General John Pershing responded by selecting the 339th Infantry Regiment of the 85th Division for this assignment. The 339th was affectionately known as Detroit's Own, since most of the men were from Detroit and the southeast Michigan area. The 339th Infantry Regiment, along with the 1st Battalion of the 310th Engineers, the 337th Field Hospital, and the 337th Ambulance Company, were organized into the American North Russia Expeditionary Force, and they arrived in Archangel, Russia on September 4, 1918. They were placed under British command, and together with the British, Canadian, French, and White Russian forces, they fought the Bolshevik Red Army in what became known as the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War. The American troops were finally withdrawn from Russia in June of 1919, 7 months after the official end of World War I. On the way back to the U.S., the soldiers decided to call themselves Polar Bears and adopted it as the 339th's nickname. On July 3, 1919, the 339th's Headquarters Company, Machine Gun Company, and Companies A, E, I, G, and L all arrived at Detroit's Michigan Central Railroad Station. Photographers from the Detroit News were there to record the emotional reunions. The men coming off the trains were mobbed by their families and friends, and the final photograph there is of a fiancée clutching the jacket of her future husband. As the returning soldiers stepped off the train, they were each given a card describing the many activities that were planned for the following day on Belle Isle to celebrate the return of Detroit's own 339th Infantry Regiment, which was now known as the Polar Bears. The next morning, Friday, July 4th at 8 a.m., the men of the 339th returned to the train station and then marched down to the Detroit riverfront to board the ferry Britannia for the short trip upriver to the dock on the Canadian Channel side of Belle Isle. The weather that day was beautiful but windy, and Belle Isle was already teeming with thousands of people waiting for their heroes to arrive. 100 rockets were launched into the air as the Britannia arrived at the dock. Young ladies wearing their American Red Cross uniforms lined the pier and tossed flowers as the men disembarked. The men of the 339th marched directly to the athletic fields, where they were permitted to meet friends and families at their company tents. After a short time, they lined up again to parade down Central Avenue in front of thousands of relatives, friends, and ordinary citizens. The parade ended at the Belle Isle Casino, where their commanding officer, Major Brooks Nichols, was given an award. The men were then dismissed so that they could join their families and partake in the lunch that had been prepared for them by the ladies of the American Red Cross. At 2 p.m., the soldiers regrouped at the casino to hear U.S. Senator Hiram Johnson of California address all of the attendees. Senator Johnson had been a vocal critic of President Wilson's decision to send U.S. troops to Russia, and in February of 1919, he had made several speeches in the Senate calling for their speedy return. Following the senator's speech, the men were told by Major Nichols to return to their company tents, have some fun, enjoy the rest of the day, and do whatever they wanted, just as long as they were back at the Michigan Central Station by 8 a.m. the next day to board the trains that would take them back to Camp Custer and their discharge from military service. In 1920, the veterans of the North Russia Campaign organized the Polar Bear Association, and on Memorial Day 1930, they dedicated the Polar Bear Monument at Whitechapel Cemetery in Troy, Michigan. where the remains of many of the polar bears who fell in North Russia are buried. Today, the Polar Bear Memorial Association conducts a service which is open to the public every Memorial Day at 11 a.m. at the foot of the monument.
The Husky Yank came into town one day and said, I can't resist